Tēnā koe Grant.
Kia ora,
Nau mai haere mai ki tēnei. Tēnei o ngā whakāturanga. So, semi-retired now.
Semi-retired, living the good life.
How's that keeping you?
Yeah, keeping me good. It's busy. I'm actually often all around the country and busy with lots of little stuff, but doing lots of things that I'm really enjoying.
Because for a long time you served as a public servant in many different roles and different capacities for the government. How has, I guess, the direction of your mahi changed since then?
Yeah, I spent the majority of my life working for the Crown, mainly in the health sector, although I did quite a lot of work in economic development, Māori development primarily. Since then, I've had the opportunity, moiho, which I think is really important, to stop. And what the stopping did was it enabled me to have insight into a whole lot of things. First of all, the nature of the work that I did as a public servant. Secondly, the nature of the world that we live in as Māori and the world around us. Thirdly, my role as a tāne Māori, as a father and a grandfather and so on. The problem when you're busy with work, when you're busy on that treadmill to survive, is that the busyness distracts us from those things that are crucially important to our existence. And so before we know it, you blink and then our lives have gone. So now I'm really happy to be able to reflect often, to read, to write. I'm doing writing, which I haven't had the chance to do for ages. And if I'm writing, I've got to think about things. So I'm enjoying this time where I'm at.
Because it's funny that I've known you for a number of years now. You've worked with my mother running leadership training programs. You say you're semi-retired, but often I see you're just almost just as busy as you were.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, I think the key thing for all of us is around finding purpose and meaning for what we do in life, for who we are. And obviously I'm getting these insights from spending some time by myself in solitude and being able to think and reflect. But ultimately, in order to find purpose, you have to do things. It's about action as well. So there's the reflection, the introspection, but then there's the action around, how can I make this place a better place? That's what I'm interested in.
I guess it kind of aligns with something that we've been talking about quite a lot. Now random get-togethers over, in particularly the last year, talking about being present, because it's something both of us have kind of been in a sense similar journey. Obviously different parts of the journey, but talk to me about the importance of kind of being present and having that space that you're being able to be in now to kind of reflect on some of the mahi and find out those things that are most important to you.
Yeah, I talked about the busyness in life, which is a distraction, in my view, from the real important things in life. And I have come to this conclusion. It took me a long time, moiho, to get here. I've come to the conclusion that there is no future, that there is no past. There is only this thing that we call the eternal moment, and that we miss the eternal moment if we are thinking ahead of ourselves, what's happening tomorrow, the day after, my appointment with so-and-so, all of that. If we're thinking ahead, we're not present here. Or if we're thinking back, we're not present here. And so I think the challenge for all of us is to be able to be here and to honour the moment that's right in front of us, here and now. And so I'm trying as hard as I can to always do that, to be present. it's a challenge, of course. It's difficult because we think, and in our thinking we go off. But to bring myself back into the presence and to be conscious, and then, frankly, it leads you to a whole lot of different things. When you're present, it leads you to gratitude, that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. Something you said earlier about you wanting to, I guess it's understanding to be a taine, especially a taine Māori in this modern time. What does being Māori and being a taine, a rangatira, iwi leader, all that kind of stuff, what does that mean to you?
Yes, and this again is a really interesting point. So all my life, I've been one of those tino rangatiratanga fundamentalists and pro-Māori and all of this. And I'm coming to the conclusion that even that is simply a cultural inflection. My cultural inflection, which I am keen to explore and look into, is that through my DNA, my whakapapa, I was born Māori with Irish ancestry. But actually, moiho, I'm much bigger than that. I'm much bigger than my toto, than the DNA that's in me. When I really look inside me, when I'm completely present in this time, in this moment, when I recognise the eternal moment, that everything is connected, which is very Māori, by the way. It's a universal thing, I think, that everything is connected. Then all of those things that I really treasured, and I still do today in terms of my Māoriness, actually they fade into insignificance, because I recognise that there are things much greater than just this little slot of me as a Ngāpuhi man, which is part of my Māoriness, which is part of my Polynesianness, which is part of my Austronesianness, which takes me back to Taiwan, to our whakapapa over to that side of the world. And if you keep looking, and then we end up in the savannas of Africa and so on, and if you keep doing that, I'm not a Christian, so then I go down to the amoeba and get into the sea and all of that. When you recognise the connectivity of all things, then these things that I pursued all my life with a passion, I recognise are ultimately insignificant in the wider scheme of things. I don't wish to dismiss that. That's significant and important. But when you're present, when you really are present, then you see a whole lot of stuff that you thought was important, which is now, oh, okay, right. I can put that into perspective.
You see, it comes back, just listening to some of the kōrero that you've said, it comes back to that, a few of those sayings in Te Ao Māori, aroha tangata ki te tangata aha ko te aha, show love or respect to another person regardless of anything. A lot of those kind of fundamentals, te mea nui o te ao ko te tangata, ko te tangata, ko te tangata. Do you think, because there has been a lot of hardships happen to Te Ao Māori over the years, in particular with loss of language, loss of culture, colonisation, a lot of those kind of impacts. Do you think in our fight towards trying to reclaim our tino rangatiratanga and Te Ao Māori, there is a little bit of disconnect between who we are as Māori but also who we are as humans?
Yeah, I think so. And it's understandable. It's understandable because we live in a world that is constantly changing. And so you and I are different from our tūpuna from 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 300 years ago. So we're different. And where our tūpuna from 300 years ago, we're obliged to have an intimate relationship with the tai ao, for example. The obligation was around survival, that if you didn't get the maramataka right, if you didn't plant the gardens right, you could die. And so they had this completely intimate relationship with the cosmos. They were much closer, in my view, to what really counts than what we are, you and I, because they had this intimate relationship, not only with, tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua, tuia ki te moana, all of that, but they had this completely intimate relationship with how everything moved. So, for example, a simple thing like, when you have a look at that rākau out there, and we refer to it as the tuakana. So we bent the knee to our environment. We recognised the relationship which is crucial to our survival. The challenge with us in 2024 relates to the exploitation of our resources, the exploitation of our people, the exploitation of all things in order to make profit. And I think we've moved away, many of us have moved away from that intimate relationship where we bend the knee to this planet that we live on because we must in order to survive. We are now living at a time when the key thing, including with our present government now, where the key thing is to exploit the resources from our whenua in order that we can live a better material life, and I find that to be challenging. So we have moved away from that. However, that said, Moiho, I'm heartened that our young people that are coming through, those that have been to kohanga reo, kura kaupapa, and those that have been brought up with our Māori ways of being, thinking, they hold that fast. And I'm hopeful that they will be able to continue and amplify that kind of thinking, and that they do it quickly. I do have a view that unless we address these issues very quickly, we're in big trouble very quickly. In fact, I'm now my background is in public health. I'm now advocating, I'm saying our public health model's broken, and that what we have to do in public health is we have to elevate the tai ao to our primary concern and everything else subsequent. No good having all the logistics around a pandemic if our planet's burning, so I'm now arguing actually what we have to do is bend the knee, do everything we can to protect and ensure that we can sustain ourselves on this planet. We're spending a lot of time doing stuff here, and there are fires going on all around the world.
It's like that whole thing trying to figure out where the cause is coming from rather than being the ambulance at the end of the car crash, really. Yeah.
It's exactly that. Higher level thinking. We get distracted with life distracts us, saying, the need to have a job and to buy a house and then another house and then a car and another car, all of that. They're all distractions. And which is why I'm grateful to have some time where I can stop, think and get some insight into all of this.
It's kind of funny, finding the connection between literally what you were just talking about just then, with what we said earlier, with being kind of present and how Māori, a lot of people back in the day used to be present because they had to bend the knee to the rākau. They had to make sure they understood what their te ao huri, what the world around them in that time was like. Otherwise it was survival. Where nowadays it's, we're often kind of stuck in that rat race that you've explained, and we're not looking at the world around us. We're not seeing the little things for what they are and the importance of them. We're kind of stuck, as people would say, stuck in the matrix in a sense. What's a tono that you have for whānau to kind of, or do you have any tools that whānau can kind of use to make sure they kind of self-check to find out what those important things are in their life?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think this kind of stuff with each other, how you and I talk often, and I what happens is, I think with many of us in our whānau, we have transactional conversations. Pass the butter. You know, did you pay the bill? Or, you know, I need this or I need that. But we don't often have the time where we can sit down and really drill into those things that are important to us as human beings. And again, part of that, I think, Moiho, is because we're so blimmin' busy. You know, we're always on the go, go, go. But I think having the opportunity just to sit and spend quality time around, you know, like saying, what are the things that are important to you this week? Moiho, you know what I mean? What are the key things on your mind? What are your challenges? You know, not having the fear around having a difficult conversation around whatever that may be. But if we have the courage to be honest with each other, the courage to confront stuff that might be challenging, just to be honest, to walk in our truth. The moment we can walk in our truth, whatever that is, to be vulnerable and so on, with each other. First of all, as whānau, because I think it all starts at home. No good Grant talking to Moiho.
If
know,
Grant can't talk to his own whānau or his wife
and
or children.
Ellie looking at this and saying, "Oh, whatever, man." You know, so I gotta be truthful first to me, to my whānau. I gotta walk in my truth all the time.
I guess it brings up a good point around. I've been talking to a few friends lately about that whole thing. If you can't be yourself around others, and you have to change some of the parts about you or the way you talk or some of your ideologies, should you really be friends with those people? And I find like a lot of people are quite uncomfortable in their own skin. Me as well. Like for a long time, I feel like I've, especially in some of the roles that I've had, working at the Herald, for example, being one of the few Māori that have been in that place. There's certain things that I've fundamentally had to change as a person just to fit in that kind of environment. I feel like there's kind of been a little bit more awakening, at least in myself and people around my generation, and I hope more in others. But anecdotal evidence tells me that people are being a little bit more wanting to be themselves and kind of not having to hide who they are or what their kind of beliefs are or how they like to work and operate.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a frustration at the shallowness of this world. That people are, I work my butt off, I go hard, and I seem to be going nowhere, and I feel I've bought this and I've bought that and I've bought this, I've accumulated a whole lot of stuff. At the end of the day, I feel empty. There's something deeply fundamental missing in me. And part of the answer to that is the kōrero we have to have with ourselves first, before anyone else. It's this deep, hard, everyday kōrero around who am I? Who am I? And until we're able to answer those questions, we have to go in, right? What we do in this world is we always go out. We always go out. So it's always, the answers are always external to us. It's the next purchase or it's whatever it is. It's the next job. Or it's the bigger money. It's always external. Actually, in my view, it's not. The answers are deeply internal to us, but it requires that we have the courage to face ourselves and even to have a look at those darker sides to us. And that does take courage.
What's a lesson that taught you that in a hard way? That taught you to really kind of self-reflect? What's something that you've done that you can kind of share for those that are listening?
I think I've hurt people. Because I've been so caught up in the selfishness of myself and my ego. And I think it's afterwards when you've had the moment to reflect and understand that the damage that you've done because you're so oblivious, because you're caught up in yourself. And it's then that you suffer the regret. And I don't want to keep myself in regret, or I'm so sorry I did that. I need to move forward. But in order for me to be able to move forward. I have to look at all my dark places.
Mm.
I have to be really honest around, and you were pretty shitty then, you know, and to go and have a look and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's important for all of us, is to look at ourselves and who we are and what we are, and in particular to answer the invitation around having a look at that stuff that we push down on ourselves because we're ashamed of it.
Mm.
We don't want to face it. It's too hard. I would hate for Moiho to know this about Grant, because everyone sees me as this person.
Mm.
This is my PR image.
Mm.
But actually behind the PR image there's also this other person.
Mm.
Now, I'm the one that has to do the work and go in. And sometimes you go in there and have a good look. And you got to be careful not to get stuck in there. Because it's, you know, I like this expression, when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, don't park your tent, keep going. So you can go in and you need to do that work, not get stuck on it, not get too caught up in the introspection. But in order to be whole as a person, you know, for me to be who I really am, I have to embrace all of me, including that part of me that's not so nice. And I'm, you know, and I think that's an invitation for all of us really to do that. Then you feel more comfortable in your skin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you walk around and you're open to what you've done and not proud of some of the stuff, but it is what it is, and I'm sorry I hurt people, but I'm not going to, you know, resolve from the fact that that happened. That's part of me as well. I'm the sum total. Oh, this is another interesting thing. Moiho, here's an interesting point. So I'm the sum total of all my experiences, right?
Yep.
And how I've responded and how I grew up in my environment, my whānau. But I recognise also I'm the sum total of my epigenetics. So, you know, the DNA. So all my tūpuna, if you think of that, it's just gobsmacking. Because then you go all the way back. How many hundreds of grandparents have we had? And you go all the way back. Actually, we carry their DNA. You do, I do. We all do. Nick does. All of us carry that DNA here. We're the evolution of all of that. We're the sum total, and we're the best it is. Well, that's a challenge to me to be the best I can be on behalf of my tūpuna and all of that. But when we have a look at those epigenetics, which explains a whole lot of stuff about, you know, why I'm got a small build or whatever, in my view, we shouldn't use that as an excuse. So, you know, often for us as Māori, we talk about the trauma of colonisation. Absolutely right, it was traumatic. It continues to be traumatic today in 2024. But my view is we have to be very careful about continually calling up the trauma. You know, that there's a mauri that comes with that kupu. And now I want to say, let's leave the trauma behind. Let's acknowledge it, never ever forget it, and let's deal with it, of course. You know, I'm not denying it. I don't deny trauma. Trauma's everywhere. I don't deny it, of course. But actually what I want to do is flip that around. And instead of talking about trauma for us as Māori, I want to talk about flourishing. So if my vision is for us as Māori and others to flourish, then the actions I do as a result of my evolution to be the best that I can, my actions are going to be around flourishing, not around sustaining the trauma, keeping everything, woe is me, I don't want that.
Because it just keeps you in the dumps, eh? It just
Keeps you in the
depressed,
dumps,
and it's really
depressed
hard to
all
kind
of
of
that,
see the light at the end of the tunnel or
Yeah.
find a way through it.
Yeah, and I think what we need, for example, I think for us, all of us as leaders, that we need to have a vision into the future that is inspiring and is aspirational. Particularly, I've got 26 mokos. So when I look at those mokos and I think, man, I've got to do everything I can to make sure that this place that we all live in is going to be the best place possible for them and my kids. And everything, every little action counts. It goes for or against. So everything I do has to contribute to making things better, no matter how little it is. And I think the key thing around that is the example that I portray to my kids and my mokas and those around me. And the example I think moiho is less around the wāwā, less around Grant's kōrero. But what does the fella do? You know, how does he live his life? Is he full of teka? You know, people know by how you live your life, and that for me is whatever I do in life, I've got to be true to myself, but I've got to do all that I can to make this place a better place for my kids, my mokas, and everyone else.
Like a lot of the stuff that you were just describing to me, because I was thinking that, you know, one of the questions that I do want to ask you is, you know, what is leadership? A lot of things that you just discussed really, for me, falls under that category of what a leader is, kind of walking the talk, understanding, you know, the things in himself that he needs to correct. But what is your description on what a leader is?
Yeah. I think firstly, you have to lead yourself. And when I say that, you have to be the example. It's not about the talk, as I said before. It's about the walk. So a leader is not 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock, turn it off. So everything that I do, everything that comes out of my mouth, the way I am in my silence, it's my silence, and the way I am, it's my example as a human being that is my leadership model. Now, people confuse leadership with management. So I think a leader is a person who understands who he or she is. They, who he, she, they are, deeply understands who they are, because in my view you cannot be a leader unless you first can lead yourself. And then beyond the leading of the self, it would be incongruent of me, and it has been in the past, for me to lead an organisation or a group of people or a team when my home life is crap. You know what I mean? So there has to be a consistency between, first of all, me with myself. That's the first leadership job. It's me being a leader of myself, being the example. And then secondly, it's my relationship with my immediate whānau. Because if I haven't got that right, waste of time, man.
Trying to manage the hapori.
Waste of time being a team leader or whatever. The leader of the CEO of an organisation or of the iwi. Because people know. You know, I had this said to me by a good friend of mine. My marriage broke up. And he said to me, Bevan it was, he said to me, "Oh, Grant, CEO of everything." And I was young, up and coming Māori leader and going for it, and I was going for it. CEO of everything except your whānau. And I thought, that's exactly right. And that was an insight and a learning lesson. So for me, a leader is first of all someone comfortable in their skin, leads themselves, has an authentic leadership with their own family. It's a servant leadership before it goes anywhere else. And leadership is not management. You know, management has been part of an organisation, of course, you know. So there's management, and there are formal roles in that. But leadership is a bit of a different thing.
I want to talk a little bit, I want to move a little bit into the politics space now. I think we've covered a lot within leadership, but one of your roles as a public servant was working with New Zealand First. Can you tell me a little bit about that time and some of the challenges that you had to face within that role?
Yeah, there's a challenge as a public servant, first of all. One of the challenges of a public servant is that you have to do anything and everything that the government of the day requires you to do. So when you're in a government department, you have to bend the knee to your minister, no matter what the minister says. there are caveats around that. You have an opportunity as a public servant to give free and frank, honest advice to the minister. My experience is most of the time that's dismissed, and it can get you into trouble. So I've had a lot of experience, as many of us have, working in the Crown. And ordinarily it hasn't necessarily challenged me greatly around who I am in terms of being a Māori and in terms of my Māori values and my political values. When I did the work with Shane Jones, that was really interesting work. It was interesting work because at the personal level I really admired Shane. He's a whanaunga. He's a whanaunga as well. I really admired him because he's very smart, very bright, and onto it, and he's very driven. He's very driven. And he was keen to ensure that we were able to invest money effectively into the regions to grow the regional economies, including in Tai Tokerau. One of my roles was to support Shane in doing the work that he was doing in the Tai Tokerau. And also part of the role was to ensure that we managed risk. So there was quite a lot of risk involved in the work that we were doing, which was around the management of the Provincial Growth Fund. So there was always a lot of risk. There's often risk in many government programs, and we just needed to make sure that in everything we did, the language I used with our team was we played a straight bat. I have this, many of us do, I have this thing about being honest and being tika. And so the kōrero we had in our team was play a straight bat, play everything straight. Make sure there's nothing tricky. If there's anything that even verges on, something that might be controversial, then make sure we declare everything. So that one is that we can protect the minister and do the work that we're obliged to do. But two is that we minimise the risks that were there in terms of the work that we were doing.
Because there's a lot of putia that kind of went to Tai Tokerau in that period. Obviously, provincial growth funding helped a lot of people out. What was interesting, and I kind of want to dive in a little bit, is shortly after money was put in the north and in other regions, he lost the seat. Shane lost the seat in the north. What do you think that reflects within the way Te Ao Māori vote?
Yeah. He targeted Pākehā voters. He targeted conservative voters. Hone said to him, you need to target Māori voters, Shane. They'll vote for you. But the Pākehās won't. And they didn't. He was thrashed. So I think that was a learning lesson.
Because it was interesting seeing that, especially with from the media perspective, seeing that he lost his seat up there.
Yeah. That was very interesting. There were there are no friends in politics. Politics is about numbers. When I look back on that, there was this false loving of Shane. People loved him because he had $3 billion fund. And in politics there are very few real friends, the real loyal ones. Shane had some people around him very loyal, but most of the people who were floating around, they were just after the money, the putia, that's all they were. The moment the putia was got, the votes went elsewhere.
Can we talk? We'll dive a little bit more into the technicalities of politics, and I guess why there's so much revulsion from a lot of people with it. Can you explain to me how, just for our whānau, how our political system works and operates?
I can. So we've imported the Westminster style of democracy, and if I put it really simply, so what that is we've got, if you imagine this box here, and then in the box there are three parts to the box, and our parliamentary Westminster style democracy is made up of this. There's the executive, and the executive is the branch of government which makes all the decisions around law and policies. So that's cabinet, and in our country, our cabinet, usually it's 20 around the table with all the governments, and so you've got the cabinet, which we call the executive, and under cabinet, sometimes you'll have 4 or 5 or 6 associate cabinet ministers, and it's the same with this government. So this government has, the executive is a cabinet of 20, and then under that there's about 6 or 7 associate cabinet ministers. Now this is where all the power is. So these are the people, these are the ministers who have the authority to make decisions and so on. So the cabinet makes the decisions around law, whether we get new laws or whether we rescind old laws.
Mm.
The cabinet has to go to Parliament, which is the second part of this 3-part story. Parliament also includes the opposition. And in a democracy, there is a contest of ideas. So the opposition and the government have a contest of ideas. They debate things all the time in Parliament over every law change or whatever. They have these vociferous debates, and at the end of the day there's a vote taken. The ayes have it, the noes don't. And when the vote's taken, whatever that vote is, that's what is going to be for a law or whatever. And so the third part, I said there are 3 parts to this in terms of how a parliament's set up. The third part is called the judiciary, and the judiciary are the judges in that. Also included in here is the Waitangi Tribunal. There are other things underneath this, but generally the judges are the third part of our parliamentary system. So you have the executive, you have Parliament, and then you have the judiciary. The whole lot comprises our parliamentary system, and that's how we operate.
Can we talk about what needs to happen for a party to come into power, on election night? And the reason why I want to talk about this is because obviously the coalition government that we have at the moment is an interesting one. We have National, NZ First, and ACT, and something that I always get a lot of our whānau, a lot of people doom gloom, oh no, terrible, all right wing, all very much this way. But I was actually low-key happy that NZ First got in there, so it wasn't a runaway train for ACT and National. Can you talk about what the coalition means, in particular as well around what does that mean for caucus? And that power dynamic.
So I can't remember the date, what year we voted for MMP, which is mixed member proportional representation. But there was a point in time in our country when we had enough of the first past the post system, which was mainly National and Labour, and we decided that we would try a new system of government called MMP. And what that means is that when you go to an election, you have 2 votes. And 1 vote you put towards the party that you prefer, and the second vote you put towards the candidate in your electorate that you prefer. The advantage of MMP means that it gives the country a much wider range of parties that may better align to your values. So, for example, we now have the Greens, we have the Māori, Te Pāti Māori, we have ACT and so on. So there's a whole bunch of parties that were able to participate in the governing of our country as a result of MMP. Now, in order for a small party like Te Pāti Māori to get into government, they have to get over the 5% threshold, or they can get in actually by having members who are standing in electorates to win the electorate. So there are two ways you can get in. Now, I was a real fan of MMP. However, if I come moiho to the latest election and how that played out, where we have a coalition government was formed, and the coalition government is comprised of National, New Zealand First and ACT. So New Zealand First got something like 6.6% of the votes. I don't know what ACT got, maybe 10%, and National got the rest. And so you have this coalition of three parties. Once the government was formed, they came in and they set up some coalition agreements. Now, this is very interesting because for me, it exposed the weakness of MMP. And in the negotiating around the coalition agreements, both ACT, David Seymour, and New Zealand First, Winston Peters, in my view, were able to punch above their weight for the percentage of votes that they got. They were significantly able to punch above their weight. And I think the reason why they did that was because we had a brand new Prime Minister, relatively new into politics, and particularly with Winston, he was up against the guru.
The guru, the king of politics.
The
himself.
kingpin, the man who knows how to do it. And so as a result of the deal, both ACT and New Zealand First were able to get into the coalition agreement a whole lot of policies that, if I think of myself as a Māori, that for Māori are doing incredible damage to us. But if I was a conservative 68-year-old Pākehā farmer, I maybe, or a businessman, I might be clapping my hands, saying, this is great, this is what we need. We need people who are going to do some action, go for it, 100-day plans, and just go for it. The Māoris only make up 20% of the population, and there had been some racist stuff before the previous election around how the implication was that Māori were controlling things and they were going to control the water, and these te reo Māori everywhere, and there were good Pākehā people who were anxious around, is this country getting taken over by Willie Jackson and his mob? And so there was a narrative that was framed up that the left are coming at you and the Māori are part of the left and they're going to control everything. The Ngāia Mahuta is going to control all the water. There'll be Māoris who aren't even elected onto councils that are going to have a say where the water goes, and so you farmers aren't going to be able to. So it went like that. And that's how it continues to go now. You can't speak foreign languages in hospitals now. And the policies that are coming out are completely opposite to... I just want to touch on this. I think it's an important point. We've had in this country for a long time policies around equality and equity, social justice. There's a need to close the gap between Māori and non-Māori. We have the science, we have the evidence to back up why we should target Māori, and part of that is this interesting thing around equality. Now, ACT's view of equality, and I think New Zealand First view around this, is that we're all the same, which is completely different to the position, for example, of Te Aka Whai Ora. So Te Aka Whai Ora's, and I worked for Te Aka Whai Ora, Te Aka Whai Ora's view was actually, in order for us to achieve this thing called equality or equity, we need to do things differently. So on the one hand, we have a couple of political parties saying we need to be all the same, we need to speak the same language, which is English, you know, to minimise anything different from the sameness, versus, for example, Māori saying, actually, in order for us to achieve justice, we need to do things differently. And by the way, we can give you the evidence. We have the science everywhere. We can show you why we're targeting it. So where this side is saying Māori are being privileged because they're getting all these resources, actually what we're saying is, if we're going to close the gap in order to save money, health system's in a mess, looking for money, if we're going to close the gap, then we're saying it's going to be cheaper if we do it this way, which means we need to embrace difference. We don't have to all be the same.
I guess it's hard for people to kind of see the bigger picture if they're not benefiting off it right now.
Yeah, it's very hard, and it does require us to be open and curious.
It's actually quite interesting too, because there is a significant difference between equality and equity too, eh?
Yes, there is. So equality is this. I've got $10, and then I give Moiho $10, and we've both got $10. So there's $20. So that's this notion of equality. But equity, for example, if Moiho's here and Grant's here, equity might be that actually in order for Grant to get up to Moiho's level, I have to give Grant $8 and Moiho gets $2 in order to get up here. So there's a difference. Moiho, I don't think, despite many decades of trying to be able to articulate that simply and clearly, there are a third of our population, according to the NZIER survey a couple of weeks ago, who don't care.
Yeah.
They don't get it. And when they do get it, they don't care.
I've had a little bit of whakaaro around this point, and I'm keen to hear what you think about it. You know, we see a lot of whānau, and this isn't an original thought, this is something that I've been listening and talking to other people and had many wānangas about, but, you know, as Māori often, you know, our nuclear family's quite bigger. In a lot of ways, we grow up with 3 generations within the whare. You know, you have a close connections with your cousins, your aunties, you have a connection with your kaumātua. So there's this whakawhanangatanga that's in us from the start, and this thinking about the wider group rather than just ourselves, where, as in some non-Māori whānaus, not talking about our indigenous cousins or anything like that, but in non-Māori whānaus, they grow up parents, sometimes single children, 1 or 2, you know, by the time they're 18, get kicked out of the house, go find your own way, you go be this individual, and you live this life without having that connection with your wider whānau, with your grandparents. Some of them instantly get put in homes, you know, and you have this very individualistic approach to life versus growing up with your whānau, and there's this more care and aroha towards others.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a function of capitalism myself.
Yeah.
So capitalism requires us to be individuals and to be consuming individuals. Now, I used to live in France in the 1990s, and talking to French people there around how they in earlier times were a lot more collectivistic, a lot more around the grouping. And so I think what we see around the world is we see cultural orientations either around a collectivistic orientation, which is us as Māori, Chinese, Indian, Pacifica, all of that, First Nations, or you see the individualistic, the nuclear family, the individual, and so on, and this Western capitalism, because there are lots of forms of capitalism, but the Western capitalism is predicated on individualism, and it is everywhere. It is completely everywhere. And so we grow up with it. So there's a tension for us as Māori. Here's the other thing, just around this point. There's a tension for us as Māori in how we are in a society that is fundamentally individualistic, but we have this whānau orientation, collective orientation. The thing when we have the whānau orientation is that our thinking and way of being is that way. Yeah. We do it naturally, right? And so, for example, maybe talking to a friend of mine, we just do it. We don't know another way, which means you and I need to be able to try and step out of that and get that individualistic to look in, because so I think what it requires of us is understanding the different worldviews. That while I've always grown up, like you, Moiho, around this whānau whānui thing, we very quickly as children come to the point where we move seamlessly between the whānau whānui, our collectivism, and into that it's seamless. It goes like this. But I think it chips away at us. Now, I just want to touch on another point while we're talking about this collective orientation and this individualistic orientation. I want to talk about our ways of thinking. So, for example, as a generalisation, we who come from that whānau whānui background tend to think in a circular way. We think in metaphors. So we're comfortable with ambiguity.
Oh man, our whole language is based around
the
metaphors.
language is all based.
Very poetic.
We're like this. So we talk in metaphors, and we're quite so the metaphor is this. But we know that when we talk about a metaphor, the metaphor is simply an iceberg, which has this deep, deep, deep base to it. Depending on how we interpret this, depends on which part of the iceberg that we activate. So because we grow up with this, we just live with it all the time.
Yeah.
So we're constantly like this. Then we find that our whānau in China, Japan, India, they all do the same. They've got the same way of thinking. So our thinking is like this. Whereas if you come to Western European particularly, including New Zealand, where they do the linear thinking, which is based on logic, it's based on mathematics, it's based on science and technology, and it's given us the wonderful things like this iPhone I've got. And so all these things are capitalism. It's given us all the advantages that we have and the standard of living, and it's wonderful. It's given us a whole lot of stuff. Depression, anxiety, and all of that.
Anxiety,
but the linear thinking, I don't want to knock it because there are real advantages. When I look at the computer gear and the camera gears here, that's part of what's happened with the linear thinking. It's given us the science, the technology, the amazing stuff we've got today. So I think the challenge for us is about being able to combine the two, the integration of this circular, intuitive way of thinking. I think we need intuition along with logic. We need to be able to combine the two into new ways of being and thinking. And I think that's the promise of the future.
I think it's going back to one of the points that you brought up a lot earlier, talking about the next generation, where you're quite happy with the next generation, the ones that are coming through kohanga reo kura kaupapa, that kind of stuff. And I consider myself very privileged in many different ways, in terms of lucky that I had the reo. I went to Kurakaupapa, and I also think it's a privilege coming through that gap between the analog world and the digital world that we kind of now live in. Being a kid born in 1990, we heard what radio was. We heard videotapes, cell phones, wired phones on the wall. Internet was brand new into this kind of new digital age. So for us, it was an easy transition for us to come into being able to operate all the cameras, all the computers, understand how to build a website. Whereas, for my parents' generation, that learning curve is a lot harder because it wasn't natural for them to kind of step into. Do you think that, with tamariki kind of coming through now, there are better ways for us as whānau, and what are some of the tips that us as whānau can do to ensure a better integration between the Te Ao Māori way of thinking and also this capitalist mindset, and how do we find that balance?
That's a good question. I think being open and curious all the time.
Yep.
Open and curious about all things. My sense is that the rate of change in the immediate future is going to be phenomenal, and our kids are going to be gifted in the sense that they're going to be so rich, so they're going to be able to have the Māori worldview embedded in them and the way they are and who they are, which gives them access to a whole lot of other stuff that is beyond AI and other stuff. But part of our world was always about being curious, and I think if our young people can retain the curiosity and embrace the kind of challenges that are in front of us, then I think by keeping an open mind around what is available and what is good for us, because a lot of stuff that's going to be available won't be good for us, being able to have that insight, what is good for us, and then utilising the best of all worlds for our benefit into the future. That's what I hope of our mokopuna, that they can do that.
And that's something that I've always, because whenever you think of the future and that kind of stuff, you're always a bit hesitant, especially thinking AI. What are Māori going to be like? How's it going to impact us? And, it can be quite doom and gloomy, almost depressing thinking about it. But something that I'm always humbly reminded of is how much, at least with Māori, how much we've been able to adapt and change our tikanga to suit the world that we're currently living in whatever time period that's been. The implementing of guns, for example, when they kind of arrived, and how that changed the way that we were able to work and operate, but we just had to, so in a sense, a lot of us Indigenous, not even just Māori, it's not alone to Māori, are able to adapt and change their tikanga. How, both of us have kind of dove quite deep into AI lately. How do you think that world, from your perspective, is going to impact how the future is, and what advice do you have for more the pakeke ones that need to learn about some of the technologies that are coming, about ways of adapting? Because a lot of even my own elders are very set in what their tikanga is and want to uphold that same tikanga all the way through. I think there's definitely a benefit to holding some of the older ways. But, and another simple example, sorry, I know, very long rant here, is, during COVID, how a lot more of our tangihanga were done on Zooms, and there was a big debate within Te Ao Māori, should we be having, Zooms and people being able to connect that way? But then if you actually look back earlier, the death of Te Atarangi Kahu, that was televised, and that happened in the mid-2000s. I remember that as a kid, kind of watching that, and really that was the first time we did it. It wasn't COVID. So how do you think we adapt our tikanga in that sense?
Well, I think the future is exciting, actually, and I know there is concern around AI and where that's going to go, but my sense is that our young people should lead should be the leaders in this space, because they have access to knowledge that many people don't have. And I think it's this kind of knowledge that is going to help form how we move into the future, not only us, but other peoples all around the world. I think it is the indigenous way of thinking and being that is going to inform positively how AI goes. And I think in terms of us older people, I think it's just an encouragement. We understand, because in our own lives we've seen phenomenal change already. We understand that change will continue, it will be exponential. And I think it's just making sure that how that change affects our lives, that we need our young people to assist us. You know, Papa, this is what you need to know about this is what you need to know about that. Because a lot of it is like, what the heck?
Because it can be mind-boggling, even just thinking
It can
about
be
it.
mind-boggling, absolutely. Overwhelming.
Yeah, and I guess when I talk to whānau and stuff, they'd always have questions around that stuff. You know, just thinking as simple as like something like Twitch, for example, where you have kids on there kind of streaming their video games, and the kids are kind of watching that and kind of donating to that cause. I always encourage whānau, like, if you don't understand it, learn more about it. Because if, you know, there's no point in you kind of throwing any judgment if you don't know what's going on and why people are kind of interacting with content like that. And that's just a tiny example of what is out there as well.
I think there is one thing I do want to say about that. You know how we get caught up? We get caught up in virtual reality and all of this kind of stuff. I think we need to make sure that we make contact with the real world. You know, so I was in a wānanga last week with Ricky Solomon, and Ricky Solomon was talking about the maramataka. And he was saying one of the problems is people want to find the maramataka on an app. I said, bro, that's classic. That's classic. What you got to do is walk out the door and look up at the sky and, you know, and go in the bush. And that's a challenge, because we're going to be urbanised. You know, more and more of us are going to be urbanised. But the challenge is for us to put our foot on the whenua, go into the bush, go into the sea, get in touch with te tai ao, really feel it, as opposed to I'm going to look at an app. You know, I'm going to look at an app to find this. You've actually got to have a real experience. It's like when you experience God, it's got to be real. It's not just got to be read the Bible, whatever. You've got to have a personal experience.
It's the only way to really make it sink into it, because information is coming at us a million miles an hour, and it's often, if it's just an app or something small that you read, it's never going to stick as well.
No, it's not. And I mean, I think with all the information coming at us, a couple of things around information. One is you need to be discerning of the information. If you're going to be discerning on information, you need to know who you are, because you need the values. Your values that drive your discernment, which enable you to analyse all this information, you've got to have values. So when you're at home with your whānau, that's where you're going to get your values, or not.
Yeah, true.
You know, and that's where, in terms of us as leaders, we've got to make sure our mokas, our kids, all of us have some really good values. A lot of us growing up getting the values from TV, from flipping Netflix, for goodness sakes. That's not where you get your values from. So there's some cautions around all this stuff, eh?
How important is it to have people around you that you trust?
Oh, crucial. Trust is everything. So I think trust relates to mana, because mana is about relationships. Mana tangata, mana, it's all about relationships. And unless you have trust in relationships with people, and other things, by the way, and not just people, you need to have trust in order to make sense of the world. Otherwise, it just gets too dystopian, nihilistic. It's too depressing.
Yeah.
So much going on. You do need to have trust, and you need to have a trust of yourself and a confidence in yourself in order to be able to move forward.
Being a public servant and in your mahi, so I'm going to kind of bring it back to some of the political korero that we had earlier. There's a couple of questions that I didn't quite get to. Being a public servant, you've obviously had a great deal to do or managing around media and how media implicates or really dictates a public view on things, and particularly around politics. how do you think media has changed and impacted politics, in particularly in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think the biases are so much more explicit now. So when you read a paper, you know which way they're angling. And so in media have an enormous influence because most people aren't going to do the deep thinking. And so what they'll do is they'll want to be spoon-fed. And if you don't think about things, and if the media are feeding you every day, you're reading, first headline you read is about the gangs, the Māoris and gangs in court, they're killing people, they're burning, they're doing this and the other, selling drugs. Every day of the year you're reading about the gangs, then you formulate a particular opinion. But you're not getting the message around white-collar crime, which is happening all the time, much more extensively than we have with the gangs. So I think with the media, they're having a major influence. Social media is having an incredible, phenomenal influence on how people think and behave. And the unfortunate thing for me is that many people, maybe most people, are not discerning around the information that they're reading. So they're reading lots, but they're not necessarily thinking deeply about it. Oh, well, the Herald said this, so it must be true. That kind of stuff. So I think media is really important. I'm personally disappointed that they're not more responsible. I understand why they're not more responsible, because they need to get those clicks and all of that. But the level of irresponsibility has been really surprising to me. Yeah.
With politics at the moment, can you talk to me about how lobbyist groups impact policy making, but also when it comes time for campaigning, there are promises made by every single person that's trying to run for their seat or any party that's kind of working and operating, but how does that marry up with the political party and what the party has to stand for, so towing the party line, and also how they work with making sure that they're doing the best by the people that are donating towards their political campaigns as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very important question in our democracy. So lobbying is a legal activity. And what lobbying does is it disguises the ability of big money to influence politics, whether it is directly through political parties, through donations, for example, or whether it's through influence of public officials, which happens a lot. And we are one of the very few countries in the world that have very few rules and regulations around how to manage that. I'm part of a group now that are doing a lot of work around managing the ability of lobbyists to influence politicians. And we're looking to do lots of stuff around setting up a register of lobbyists, for example, understanding who's lobbying who and for what. We're looking to set up clearer rules around donations to political parties. So we're looking to do a whole bunch of stuff in order to try and level the playing field. Because obviously we have the evidence that those who have a lot of money are able to influence decisions being made in our parliament, and generally those who have very little influence. So definitely money speaks, is influential, and we need to make sure, in order that people can retain faith in a government, that we need to make sure that we iron out those crinkles.
What are the I'm a believer that, you obviously have Labour, you have National. On paper they say this party's left, that party's right. How do they sway over time, and why are the swing votes, the ones in between, the most important?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's to do with comms, communications actually, and the comms has got to be really smart. So you have to understand, for example, right now, neck and neck in the election, in the between National and Labour, the left and the right, it's neck and neck. So right now, for example, if I was advising either party, then I would be saying to them, you need simple 3 or 4 key messages to go for the swing voters. You need to start rolling them out now, so that when they get to the election, they will have these clear messages, simple, in their head. And you got to be framing them up now, not 6 weeks before the election. Put them out now. So I think it's crucial how they do that.
That's something like it just instantly straight away. It just reminded me on Donald Trump's campaign in America, "Make America Great Again." Like just that simple.
Simple. Keep it simple, eh? And what, of course, what they do also is, and it's happening now in America, is you get champions, key people that come out on your side, those influencers. So it's really shifted from 20 years ago. I mean, the fundamentals are the same. You need key messages and so on. You need to know who the swing voters are. And now we've got the technology where you can drill down. You can drill down, where people's preferences are because you've got access to the
A lot more
metadata.
Yeah.
And you can target people in wherever, or tahuhu or whangarei, exactly who they are, what they are, and you know the key words to give them. So the words I'd give Moiho are different to the words I'd give Grant, but you frame your pitch to target that person, and they're doing that now. It's clever.
How do we? I guess this is a great debate that a lot of people have been having for a long time. How and why is it important for Māori to vote? Like why should my whānau at home that are in Tauranga or in the King Country or wherever they are, why should they vote when they've never voted before?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Moiho. I mean, I think it's important because politics affects every aspect of our lives. So whether it's our kids going to school, whether it's us trying to buy a house, whether it's us getting work or travelling, it doesn't matter what we do, where we go, that politics affects everything that we do. And we need to understand that because we have power that we can exercise. Our agency comes to us every 3 years when we have the opportunity to vote. But what it requires of us is that we understand what we're voting for. So it means that we do have to understand the difference between A or B and then make a decision. Which one best aligns with my values? And I think if we can do that, when you're having kai at the table, have a kōrero with a whānau, it doesn't matter if my wife votes one way, which she does, and I vote another, doesn't matter. What matters is that we exercise our ability to do that, because it is so important, so fundamental to us being a citizen in a democracy.
When I see how our lives have changed so much over the last 20 years, and I look at you now being semi-retired, and even some of the hauora struggles you've gone through recently after trying to bike around Lake Taupo. How do you think you've changed, in particular around your outlook? I know you've said you've been a lot more present and stuff like that, but how have you changed fundamentally as a person as well?
Yeah, I think I don't know, you'd have to ask Ellie this. I think I've become a better person.
Do you think it's from the struggles, or do you think it's from the reflection, or everything?
Yeah. It's there's there's something about adversity. They say adversity makes you stronger. It does. It bloody kills you. One of the two. And I think there is something about adversity that can be helpful. Not that I want to encourage everyone, to go through adverse struggles. I don't. But I think there's a point for me where I grew up in myself, and that's just been relatively recently. I think I've generally been a good person, but there's a point where you do ask some really big questions about what is the meaning of all of this stuff, and you work your way through a lot of stuff. Part of how you work your way through it is through relationships. You talk about trust and relationships. So part of how you develop is through other people. It's the reflection. I see myself in you. How you are with me, I can feel it and sense it. That helps to grow me. And I do that everywhere I go. So you grow and develop as a person. And I think the ultimate goal is a detachment from the sense that it's all about me. And then the moment deep inside me that I recognized it wasn't, that I was part of some bigger thing, I think that's when I got out of my head. I think too much. I think about a lot of stuff. I do a lot of thinking, a lot of reading. I cogitate too much. When I got out of here, got out of the thinking, and then I got down to the being, and that's kind of, what does that mean? But when I did that, and instead of experiencing the world through my brain, experience it through everything else that I have, that's when I started to become a better person, I think. Not even a person, that's when I became conscious that there's more than just this. I also became more accepting of things, and more gratitude, all that kind of stuff. I became conscious of those, joy, balance, harmony, that kind of stuff, which was completely different to how my life was going before.
Do you think, as a tāne, or even not even as a tāne, as someone that's walking within this world, juggling a lot of the different things that you juggle within your life, your role as a tāne in your relationship, your role as a iwi leader, your role in the many forms of your job or your mahi as a public servant or CEO, often it can be quite lonely a lot of times. Do you think you are happier now?
Yeah, definitely. Loneliness is interesting. I think there are two kinds of loneliness. There's the loneliness which is about solitude, which is where you engage with yourself. When you are in solitude, it's an engagement with yourself, and it's an engagement with everything else. When you're in solitude, you're present with everything. When you are lonely, you are disengaged from yourself, and you're disengaged with everything else. You really are lonely. That leads to depression and the jumping into the abyss. So there are two distinctions between loneliness. I really enjoy solitude, the opportunity to be with myself and with everything else in contemplation.
Because I guess it's a distinction that a lot of us need to kind of make within our own lives, especially when you have some kind of role as a leader in any sense, or manager in whatever role you're in. It can be quite a lonely path sometimes, but I guess it's a lonely path because you choose to make it a lonely path.
It can be. Look, I think one of the things about being a leader is about having the courage to be true to who you are. It's easy to go with the crowd, but a leader differentiates themselves when they're able to stand up on their own and say, no, I disagree. So that's a fundamental trait of being a leader, is to be able to say, based on everything I know, feel, sense, and so on, that's a bad decision. And then going with who you really are on that. So that is true. You can definitely stand alone, absolutely. It's part and parcel of being a leader.
What are 3 things that you do to ensure that you are connected with yourself? Like, I guess some people would say, what's your rongo? What's the thing that kind of what are three things that you do to make sure that you're in line?
I always do karakia. Not rote, although the karakia itself, I might say it again and again and again, but I'm not saying it. So when I do karakia, I think deeply about what I'm saying. So I want to be present in it. And I think about the power of those words that I'm saying. So here's the first thing. One is karakia. Every day I try and meditate. So meditate is finding a space within myself where I can be by myself and everything else and be very, very thoughtful. And thirdly, I try as much as I can to be silent. Yeah, silence is interesting, man. It's hard too, because, see, it's easy to web. But I think silence is the language of God, and whatever God is. I'm not a Christian, and everything else is a deterioration. But I think in the silence, there's some power in silence.
Yeah, that's something that I'm still trying to learn to do, because in a lot of ways, depending on what role that I have to have, as an executive producer or producer on certain projects, you're meant to have the answer. So often it's like you're talking, you're just trying to do what you can to fix the solution. But I think now at this stage of my life, I think that, like what you just said, silence is so important. You got to be there and listen. You got to be present. Sometimes you don't have the answer, but you're like, come back to me tomorrow and we'll have the answer.
Yeah, there's power in silence, man. There really is.
What piece of advice would you give to a young Grant that was a hustle and bustle, that did everything he can, that had CEO of everything and except for his whānau? What kind of piece of advice would you give to that Grant?
Be careful of the bullshit. It's everywhere. There's bullshit everywhere. Be careful of the stuff out there and come home. Come home to yourself. That's what I'd say. Come home to you. But bro, what does that mean? Come home to you. That's what I'd say. Do the work on yourself.
Because it's always tricky. I'm almost class middle age, and I'm only just starting to go on my journey of that. Trying to learn to be who you are and understand who you are, comfortable in your own skin, all of the above. What tono do you have for our whānau that are going through tricky times at the moment, where the noise is really loud, when there's a lot of external stress going on in their lives? And I want to link it back to something that you told me that I thought about, and I thought about this for months. You said nothing matters. Yeah, but
it's so true. When you're in the mouth of the lion that's crunching you, all you can see are these teeth coming at you. But it all passes. Everything passes, And at the time, it is the most important thing. Of course it is. It's about survival and that. But when I look back, I think, I get it. Everything is transitional. Me, myself, I'm transitional. This will all pass. I'll go back to the earth or whatever. It'll all pass. So when you're in the middle of it all, have faith. It will pass. The sun will come up again. It sounds shallow, but it's so true.
And last little last partai. Well, it's not really a partai. It's something I'm keen for you to kind of explain a little bit more about. But you had me contemplating this one for a long time too. The importance of mana and what mana means.
Oh, yeah. That's another really big one. I think mana is at the heart of being Māori. Actually, it's at the heart of being human. And maybe other things as well. So, mana is, it's the power of relationships. And everything's connected. So if we talk about whakapapa, you know, if you talk about, it's funny we're talking about this. I was having a hohaurongo hui on Sunday between a couple of hapu. And the word that came to me, because we were in conflict, was whakamana tangata. You know, we need to detach from our egos and recognise that this person that we're having conflict with is actually another version of you. We're having conflict with each other, and you know, when we can recognise that at a higher level, then our role is less about conflict and more about elevation of ourselves. Within all of that is mana. If you have a look at our old people, pre-European, and around how they were with everything, mana was at the heart of everything, actually. Everything, including with our atua. Mana was right there, So I think it's absolutely fundamental to what we are. And it's another thing, it's the thing about language is that it's often insufficient to explain stuff. You know, it's I struggle to find the word to explain, for example, mana. But when you feel it, when you experience it, when you live it, when you know, it's a lived experience. It's kind of okay, got it. And then we sit in silence on it. It's really interesting when you really do feel something incredibly powerful that you just want to boom like this, that often you just sit in silence.
Little controversial question just to throw at the end there. Do you think some of our wahine Māori understand themselves better, faster and sooner than the stubborn staunchness that our tāne have had to hold?
Yes. Yes, I do. And I think it's a different energy. The Māori kura and the whatu kura is a different energy. If you have both energies together, they complement each other, but they have to be different. And the Māori kura, this female essence, is about nurturing, nourishing, caring for, all of that. It's a different level of energy. You have it in you. So when I talk about that, I'm not talking about being a wahine. I'm talking about the essence of the Māori kura. It's within you, it's within me, it's within all of us. Just indeed as whatu kura is over here. But the overriding essence for the Māori kura is one of nourishment, the nurturing, all of those kind of qualities. And they are a balance to us. And in my view, there are different energies that combine. When they combine, we have the divine. You can have the divine over here, of course, but there's something about the combination of those two, which leads us into the divine, a balance of energies. Too much this side is not good. Too much this side is not good. In the Māori world, we're predicated on finding balance and harmony, which is where mana resides. In order to find balance and harmony, the moment you find balance and harmony, it pushes against itself and it goes back out. It's an oscillation.
Mm.
It's dynamic. You and I we're all dynamic. Wahine, tāne. There's a dynamism in the world.
And I think it's like interesting because, like, especially when you were talking about, trying to explain mana and not having the words to kind of communicate what that means. I remember listening to an interview with one of my favourites now is Mo Gaudet, and when he was talking about the world is missing femininity, and I sat there and contemplated that for a little bit and talk about this power dynamic between what it is to be a tāne, what is it to be wahine and strong, and whatever those feelings are, or the Māori kura. And the first word, like, as a young man, you think, oh, we need to be more feminine. You're like, oh, there's always that 10% of insecurity within you saying, like, oh, am I not being enough in that sense? But as I sit there and think about it more, I keep aligning that femininity to actually tell Māori in a lot of the ways that we think and operate, whakawhanaungatanga, kotahitanga, all of that in the Pākehā world construct does fall under a feminine behaviour in that kind of sense. So I think it's just, so it's like the wording and understanding the wording without letting the ego get in the way of what you think it is, and kind of breaking it down and realising, actually, I do have a lot more, in the Western world, feminine traits, then, I obviously still have masculine traits as we all do. I'd say my mum's almost a little bit more masculine in certain ways than she has to be, and it's, due to a number of reasons. But it's interesting, I guess, trying to learn the language and understand the language and breaking it down to what it actually means to you.
It is, and for me, I've had this natural intuition around balance and harmony, and it's only been relatively recently I've been able to articulate that, and I now understand. So for me, the female-male essence is an oscillation of a wider energy. Yeah.
No, it's awesome. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today, Grant. And I'm just so happy that I get to share some of the golden nuggets that I get from you every time we have a kōrero with others that do end up listening or watching this. So, tēnā te mihi atu kia koe. Thank you very much for
Kia ora mai. Thank you. Ngā mihi.